So I'm starting a matched pair of double rifles. These will be 10 bore, and the pattern for this rifle is based off of an 1844 Purdey rifle, so very English style. Most everything is going to follow the pattern of the original very closely. There are going to be a few changes though. The original had a single blade front sight. This is going to have a silver Caterpillar with a flip up night sight, so that's one change. The original had a single fixed and a single folding leaf on it. This is going to have a multi-leaf express sight. And then the other major change from the original is going to be the finish. On the original, everything was blued except for the locks, which were color case hardened. On this one, the locks are going to be color case hardened, but the rest of the furniture, which is all iron, is going to be rust browned. So that's a little bit of a change. But other than that, overall this is going to be the same as the original 1844 Purdey rifle that I'm using for an example to model this off of. So here's the collection of parts I was able to buy. As I said, this is going to be a matched pair of 10 bore rifles, so there's actually 4 barrels here. And then there's 2 of everything. I'm just going to show you one set, the other set's in a box. But a set of English bar locks, left and a right. And shotgun style cast butt plate. This is the trigger guard, and this is a commercial casting. It's going to have to be modified slightly to make it look like the original English casting, or the original English trigger guard, but this trigger guard's close enough I can start with it and modify it. This is an NECG multi-leaf express sight and a Jeff Tanner ball mold. So those are the parts I was able to buy commercially, and of course there's I was able to buy the nipples commercially, obviously. The rest of this though, the breeches, the tang, the triggers, the trigger plate, ribs, swivels, ramrod, all of those parts, and the regulation wedges all have to be made from scratch, and so I'll be building those one piece at a time basically. And so that's what I'm going to do, is I'm going to go through this process and I'm going to show you how to take a pile of parts and some scrap metal, or some new metal in this case, but some metal, and machine it all down and turn it into a working set of regulated double rifles. And that's going to be the bulk of the project. What I'm going to start with today, obviously, I've already drawn my set of prints. That's where I start all my projects, is on paper. I made a copy of those prints and made them in pen, so that I've got a set here that I can write on, draw on, smudge on, keep in my shop, and it's not going to mess up my original set of drawings. And so what I'm going to start with doing today is I will start by turning these barrels. And what I'm going to do is I will drill them, or in this case, because they're big enough, I'll use my boring bar actually. I'll bore them out, I'll single point thread them, and I'll do that to all 4 of them, and on the breech end. And then what I'm going to do is I will make a temporary breech plug, one that's a little extra long, and what it'll do is it'll give me something to screw into each one of these, and it'll be able to put my dog on it for my lathe, and I'll be able to turn between centers and turn the taper on these on the center line of the bore. And I'll just use that same plug to do all 4 of them, turn them all down to straight taper, and they're going to go from 1.25 inches down to inch, 26 inches long. The rifling in these is set up for round ball, so it's 1 in, what did I order? I ordered 1 in 84 twist for these 10 bore round ball, which should be right. And those are Joe Williams barrels from the Gun Works up in Oregon. Very good guy to do business with. I get a lot of my barrels from him. He does excellent work. The quality is fabulous, and the barrel blanks are as good as any I've ever seen. So that's what I'm going to plan on doing for the rest of this week, is working on tapering these down, getting all 4 of those tapered and breeched, and the breech threads cut, And then I'll start in on making breech plugs for them. And that's where double rifles differ from a lot of other guns, is because the way the breechings are set up on these have to be one barrel on each pair is basically a normal breech plug. It's just a recessed chambered breech, like a Knox patent breech basically. And then it's got the nipple flat machined into it and drilled and tapped for the flash hole. The other breech plug though, because it has to wrap in and contour to this one, the other breech plug is actually made out of a large piece of bar stock, and it's machined off, threaded, machined for the patent breech, and then the block itself is machined to match the same contour as the other breech. And then the two of them are fitted together, and that's what determines and sets your fit up on your barrels. And of course then the barrels get soldered together to hold them in, the breeches get fitted in, and then after all that's done, I can machine the hooks for the end of the breech plugs. So basically the gist of this week's work though is going to be turning these barrels down and getting them threaded for breech plugs and turning the taper on them. That's going to take me probably most of the week. The only other parts I was able to buy for this obviously is I bought my blanks for my stocks, and these two pieces came from the same tree. They're not bookend cuts. I couldn't get two exactly matching cuts that were bookend basically, where they were cut, you know, side by side. But I was able to get two pieces that were cut from the same tree, so the grain structure is very similar in them, color's the same, and the figure and whatnot's pretty close to the same in them. So other than some minor differences at where this cut has a little bit of a burl showing in it and this one doesn't, the grain structure itself basically has the same pattern, same grain width, and the same density and color to it. So it's kind of nice when you can do that. If you're going to build matched pairs of anything, if you can get the same piece of wood out of the same tree, it's always nice to have it. So I started by facing off a piece of 1-inch bar stocks, about 3.5–4 inches long, doesn't really matter. I faced it off on both ends. I center drilled it on both ends, and then I single point cut a set of threads on this end. And this is 7/8 14, which is going to be what the breech plug is going to be threaded for, is 7/8 14. Barrels on a 10 bore on this one are cut to a groove diameter of 775. So by going to 7/8 14, that's 875. And that'll give me the ability to clean up the complete rifling in the barrels, and still give me plenty of wall thickness on the outside diameter for those 1.25" barrels. So 7/8 is going to be a good diameter to do this. And what this piece will allow me to do get all this out of the way here. What this piece will allow me to do is it's got a center on both ends of it. When I thread the barrel, each one of these barrels, I'll be able to screw this temporary breech plug in. I'll be able to take my headstock off, use a live center in here, and a lathe dog, probably this one. It's kind of big, but it'll work for this. And this lathe dog with a face plate on it and a live center will allow me to run between centers with my barrel. I'll be able to offset my tailstock and cut my taper to match the center line of the bore, and instead of having to worry about the outside diameter. So that's where I'm headed next. Is I'm going to start threading these barrels and getting them breeched up so that I can run this temporary breech plug in there and use it to turn these down. A couple things you need to know if you're going to order blanks instead of finished barrels and you're going to machine them yourself. A few things you need to know about that. One, most barrel blanks will be a few inches long on each end, will be a little long, couple inches long. Reason for that is most barrel manufacturers understand that the rifling, when the rifling bit is going in and out, until it gets fully inside the barrel, it's partially unsupported, which means at each end, as it's unsupported, it'll actually cut the rifling a slightly bit deeper than it would down the center of the barrel. So they make them a little long, a couple inches long, so that you can cut the ends off and know that your rifling is consistent all the way down. The other thing you need to know about barrel blanks is when they're drilled, and they're drilled out of solid stock, when they're drilled, the drill bit can drift you know, starting at the beginning end, it's going to be dead on center. When it goes to the other end, though, it can drift to this, you know, off center. And so a good barrel maker, he'll stamp his barrels to let you know which end is the centered end. In this case, this is probably hard to see, but there's a 10 bore stamp on here, 10, and that lets me know that this end is the breech end because it's on center. The other end of these barrels, most of them are really close. This one I think is the worst one of the bunch. It's off about 0.008. The sidewall, you can measure the sidewall thickness and you'll find out that one side here is a little shallower than the other side. But 0.010 over a, you know, 30 inches of barrel, basically 26 inches is what these are going to end up, and this is about 30 inches long. You know, 0.010 of drift in 30 inches is really good precision drilling. Actually, that's pretty close. So, and this, like I said, this is the worst one of the bunch. The others, they're really close to center. They're closer than this one. So, but anyways, what that does is that lets you know that you want to make this the muzzle end. The stamp on the other end tells you that you want to make this the muzzle end. That way when you taper it down, it ends up being centered, and you can't ever tell that it was off center. Well, I don't know how well you can see this in the video, but if you look inside of here, you can see the threads are cut, and then back in there, there's a double shoulder in there. And the way I did that was with a little tool here that I made. And it comes in and allows me to cut the shoulder in and relieve the edge. And when I make the breech plugs will double shoulder so that they're tight at the end of the rifling, and they're also tight on the outside shoulder. So that's a nice way to do it, and it makes for a very sound system that you won't get any rust in behind your breech plug and whatnot. Makes for a nice sealed breech plug that way. So I cut these barrels to length, just a hair long. Then I faced them off. I have not crowned them yet. Not much point in that because don't know if they're centered or not. So it'll be easier to do after it's tapered because I'll know that the outside is concentric to the bore, and I'll be able to slide it back in my lathe back to a regular head chuck, and then I'll be able to crown the barrels. But what I've got set up right now is I took my chuck out, my 3-jaw chuck, and replaced it with a faceplate. Put a center in, lathe dog, and that temporary breech plug that I made, so that gives me something to ride against without messing with the barrel. And then at the other end, of course, I've got a live center, my tailstock's offset, and then I've got a cutting tool set up. So what I'll do is I'll start taper turning these down, and I got 4 of them to do, so it's going to take a while. As you can see, this isn't a particularly entertaining part of the build, and there's 4 barrels to do, full length, just like this. So, it takes a while. So, after a couple days of turning and polishing and draw filing and taking machine marks out and everything else, I got 4 barrels here, cut to length, taper turned, and they're polished out to about 100 grit. No point in taking them any further right at the minute. There'll be a bunch of soldering, ribs have to be soldered on, lugs, pipes, the whole 9 yards have to be soldered together. So there's not much point in taking it past 100 grit polish-wise right at the minute, because it'll all have to be cleaned up and polished again several times actually. So before I get to the finished grit, so might as well leave them at about 100 grit right now, and that'll be good for the moment. So the next step I'm going to do is I will change the headstock on my lathe again. I'll put these back in my lathe, and I'll crown each one of the muzzles. Then I can start working on turning the breech plugs for them. So basically what I'm doing is building a patent breech. Started out with a piece of round stock that's bigger than the barrel OD. Turned it down, threaded it to match the breech chamber, the breech threads that I did before. Then I counter drilled it and put a recessed chamber in there for powder, and then I contoured the lip of the chamber to match the ball diameter, and it's drilled through so that when I cut it off and shape it and everything, the flash channel from the nipple will drop down into the patent breech. So, but basically that's the way that's done. And now I'm going to thread the barrel up onto here and check my fit, And I'll probably end up turning just a little bit off of this face to make it shoulder up tight, and I'll show you how I do that in just a second. So I threaded the barrel on here, then I got my feeler gauge here, and I cut those threads just a little long on purpose. Then take my feeler gauge here and find the gauge that'll just fit down in there. I want to take that amount minus a couple thousandths to allow for thread crush, and that'll allow it to shoulder up tight at both shoulders. So it should be a perfect fit when I face off. I'll unscrew the barrel and face that off just a little bit to make up for this difference, and allow a few thousandths for thread crush, and then when I tighten it on there and actually sink it on there, it should tighten up both shoulders to a perfect fit. So I'm starting in on the other set of breech blocks, and I started out by taking a chunk of steel that's 1.5 inches by 2.5, and I machined off this section of it in my mill. Well, actually I cut it off with a saw and then machined it off square. And the face is machined off square, and squared a couple of sides so that I could get it centered up and trued up in my 4-jaw chuck on my lathe. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn this section around and turn the threads on it and make it just like the other breech plug basically. It'll have the recessed chamber and everything drilled in it. And then on this side over here, what I'm going to do is I'll take a boring bar and I will bore this side out. And I'll either do that here in the lathe or I'll do it in my mill. I can do it either way. And I'll bore this side out to match the other breech plug, so that there's a full breech plug here and then an opening here for the other barrel to slide into. And then I'll be able to come in and machine the rest of this to match the rib, the radius of the barrel, to match the other breech plug, and the bottom for the ramrod channel and everything. So, but this is how I'm going to start out, is by machining this off and getting the threads and this chamber section done over here, and then I'll worry about doing this other side. So I decided to use my lathe and faceplate to bore this other side out. Didn't have to. Could have put it in my mill and done it with a boring head just as easily. It's 6 of one, half a dozen of another. Came out the same either way, so it doesn't really matter. But anyway, so what I did was measured it, marked it, and drilled it out, and then used my boring head to take it on out to diameter. And you can see that the other plug fits in real nice, slides in, rotates good. So I'll be able to put the 2 barrels on, show you what it looks like from the back side once the barrels are on, so you can see how it all fits together. And then obviously I need to make another one of these for the other set of barrels, and then I can start machining all this off and getting rid of all this extra metal here. So there it is. Obviously it's sitting in my vise at a little bit of an angle, but you can see that that's the way the 2 barrels are breeched and fit together. And this is the way a double gun is done, so that you can remove the breeches, because once the barrels are soldered together, obviously you're not going to be turning them off. So you do it this way, so that if you ever have to pull the breech plugs on a double gun, you can pull the one side first and then be able to spin the other side out. And this allows you to, when I get farther along in this, obviously I've got to machine the hooks on both sides of this, remove all this excess metal, and I'll be able to machine the rib section in and the radius for the ramrod underneath. And of course these won't be out this far. It'll be cut off at the rib section on the top, and it'll be cut off basically at the end of the ramrod channel on the bottom. So it'll really only be like a 1/3 of a radius here basically. But that's the gist of how double guns are breeched up. And that's also the end of my week. That's about 50 hours this week. And so I'll pick this up again Monday, and Monday I will be able to build another one of these hopefully, and then I'll be able to start machining these out and making them look like a regular set of breeches, the hooks and the seats for the nipples, and get all that done.